afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the World Affairs Council Upstate, America and the World Flashpoint Lecture Series. This series is dedicated to those current global events that are impacting us here at home and abroad. The World Affairs Council does this lecture series once a week for the public, and we are so glad you are spending your time today. Our speakers today are very special guests, and we're so grateful for them coming in from 2 different time zones to join us. First of all, I'd like to introduce you all to Heidi Kuhn. Heidi is the founder and CEO of an organization that has had a huge global impact, Roots of Peace. Roots of Peace comes out of a vision that Heidi had back in 1997 to help transform the world's poorest countries whose land had been ruined by countless wars and populated with landmines into thriving agricultural land that could sustain communities there. With a simple toast in her living room, she established this global initiative following the death of the late Princess Diana, who had spent her time and her personal energy dedicated to landmine removal. To date, Roots of Peace has impacted over 1 million farmers and families. It's just huge. Her work spans 8 countries, from Afghanistan, Angola, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Cambodia, Croatia, Iraq, Israel, Palestine, and Vietnam. Heidi's work has facilitated the increase of agricultural exports, specifically in Afghanistan, from $250 million in 2014 to over $1.4 billion in 2020. Can't say enough about that. It does my heart good to see how one organization can have a vision to help change the world. Heidi is a graduate of the University of California and recipient of the Cal Alumni Award for Excellence and Achievement. She's joining us today from California, where she is home with her family. And we are so grateful for her time and expertise. One thing we will discuss today as well is her new book that was just published this spring. It's called Breaking Ground. And we will also have a link to purchase that book in our follow-up materials for you if you're interested. So next, I'd like to introduce our moderator. South Carolina has a really special tie-in to landmine removal right now in the form of one young lady who graduated from the College of Charleston, Miss Ellie Cutright. Ellie is a research technician in Tanzania with a group called APOPO. APOPO works to train African pouch rats, giant rats, to go detect landmines. You talk about cool. Who knew that one small animal could be helping so many people? Ellie graduated in 2018 with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology and conducted research while she was there on rodent models of stress-induced alcohol-seeking behavior. We really appreciate Ellie's time today, and we look forward to continuing to connect our South Carolina residents and past residents with the rest of the world on these issues. So I'm going to turn this talk over to our speaker and moderator, and we'll look forward to all of you joining us next week. Heidi?
Thank you, and thank you for this kind introduction. Can you all see the screen? Good, good. Well, thank you so much. It's just such a great honor to join all of you from sea to shining sea. I'm here on the West Coast, and we're a few hours earlier than all of you, but just such a great honor after this Memorial Day weekend to share with you an American vision, a vision of turning minds to vines. We live in a world today with an estimated 60 million landmines silently poised in 60 countries. They maim and kill innocent victims long after the guns have silenced. It takes 8 pounds to detonate a landmine, the average weight of a newborn child. That touched me very deeply as a mother of 4 children and a cancer survivor. For cancer is a landmine. We never quite know when we are going to step on it, and landmines are a cancer to the earth. The solution in my lifetime is removal. So join me as I share this vision of turning minds to vines with all of you on this beautiful May May morning, May afternoon, your time. And if you bear with me, we're going to get this PowerPoint going. So may you all see the screen? Yes? Okay. Can you see the screen to our moderator?
Yes, I'm seeing it.
Terrific, terrific. Just always want to check those technical questions. So it all starts with our roots. And I think going back to our American roots, I'm a very proud American. My family came over in 1701 from Scotland and settled in Wiscasset, Maine, and helped build the eastern seaboard in the early days when America was just being formed. They were ship captains, and many of them met a watery grave, and then, of course, helped build the eastern seaboard with the logging and the building supplies from the coast of Maine. A young, intrepid man was born named Captain John A. McNair in 1832. And he had a vision in his early 20s. He heard there were gold in them hills of California. And the gold rush was just burgeoning. And in his young 20s, he packed all his earthly belongings on the boat and set sail for California. Well, as we always know in life, it sometimes has its challenges, and our best laid plans sometimes do not necessarily come true. He missed the boat. What you're doing as a young 20-year-old, missed the boat. But his ship set sail around the tip of the Tierra del Fuego in South America, and he took horseback through the Isthmus of Panama, through raging rivers and malaria-infected jungles, and reached the Pacific coast. He caught the old Sonora ship and sailed up to San Francisco, only to realize that his ship has sunk. We have a family motto: don't curse the darkness, light a candle. So he didn't have enough money to go into the gold hills, so he started a bank, and he started the shipping industry. And those who were coming down of the gold hills in California needed to purchase real estate. And these were the early pioneer times. Well, he was a hardworking man, and within a decade, he became a self-made millionaire, along with Leland Stanford, Collis Huntington, Mark Hopkins, and Charles Crocker, often known as the robber barons. There were some out here in California, and he was a very modest person and recognized the respect for the land and its people. And went to the southern shores of Petaluma, which is now today called Marin County, where I reside and speaking to you today. And he saw that those who were helping build America, the Chinese who put their lives on the front line and not only putting the dynamite to build burst the tunnels for the gold rush, but building the Transcontinental Railroad 150 years ago last year. So he set sail. There was no Golden Gate Bridge, and he invited the Chinese to be his guests on the property that he owned. 500 Chinese came to establish a thriving business. They were primarily men, because men were the ones who were the workers. He asked them if they liked women. He said, sail over and bring your wives and start families. Well, the area today is now called China Camp. And back then it established a thriving business, shrimp business, exporting 3 million pounds of dried shrimp to China annually. The lessons that were passed down through generations to me were respect for the land and respect for the people. And so when I heard about landmines, it certainly violated anything that was the family ethics, the American ethics that I was taught. Several years later, my grandfather was part of another historical moment here in San Francisco 75 years ago next month. On June 26, 1945, the United Nations Charter was signed. And following World War II, the worst war that the world had ever seen, Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a vision, and he gathered the original delegates together in, again, Marin County, beneath the towering redwood trees of Muir Woods. And he dubbed those trees the temples of peace, for as every redwood tree grows, you see those concentric circles growing out to establish lifetimes. And so again, those lessons were taught to me. 30 years later, I was very privileged to be an exchange student to Utsunomiya, Japan. Women at that time were not allowed in Rotary anywhere in the world. In fact, they were called Rotary Anns. And it was just through a beautiful series of coincidences. My family were early Rotarians in the 1920s here in Marin County. So they thought this would be a good education for a young woman. What it did was open my eyes to a war-torn country 30 years later, and to see how people, human beings, could live as friends. It inspired my heart at age 17, and I came home and told my parents during the 1970s that I was going to go get an education for peace, and majored in political economics of industrial societies at the University of California at Berkeley. The peace movement was going on, and I had the honor and privilege of meeting my wonderful husband for 40 years. He's been my love, my partner in peace, and the father of our 4 children. Life has its challenges. As we know, there are many. I was diagnosed with malignant cancer, 4th stage, and given last rites. And I think anybody who goes under the knife with cancer realizes it's a defining moment. And you make a promise between you and your maker. Mine was, dear God, grant me the gift of life, and I will do something special with it. Many years later, as I gave birth to a little son, who's actually his 25th birthday was yesterday, Christian, I gave birth to him after surviving cervical cancer. So in many ways, he was a miracle baby. And when I watched, holding this little child in my arms, the intrepid footsteps by the late Princess Diana on CNN, the beginning of the year in 1997, she walked the minefields of Angola. And 8 months later, she, with Jerry White and Dr. Ken Rutherford, walked the minefields of Bosnia-Herzegovina, only 3 weeks prior to her tragic death. I was asked by the Commonwealth Club of San Francisco because in the interim prior to my diagnosis with cancer, I had started my own television news company, Newslink International, and I covered the melting of the ice curtain between US-Soviet relations for CNN, Nippon Television, and various international news networks. So 100 people coincidentally came in the living room of our home from where I'm speaking, and I lifted my glass in a Minds to Vines global toast to peace. My husband and ABC7 news anchor Cheryl Jennings and many, many others joined with this vision. And from the basement of my home where I was working with my very humble roots, sent a fax. Remember the days, beep, beep, beep. I saw the fax with my inquiry as to whether the United Nations would join me in launching Roots of Peace. And behold, Gillian Sorensen, Assistant Secretary General at the time, confirmed back that Mrs. Kofi Annan and Secretary General Kofi Annan would help launch Roots of Peace. And that was in April 1997, actually 1998. The toast was September 21st, 97, and we launched it April 20th, 1998. A young congresswoman was sitting by my side and offered to help take this vision as far as it needed to go. And I'm very honored to say that today is Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who actually wrote a quote on the book, as well as Cindy McCain. As an American woman, I'm very proud of the bipartisan support that Roots of Peace has engaged, because it is the innocent footsteps of children who are maimed and killed when landmines and remnants of war are left in the ground. This is a photo of a dear farmer, and has become a dear friend of mine, cultivating the black pepper on the former battlefields of Vietnam. And the vision of Roots of Peace became grounded as we started our 501c3. Napa Valley Vintners helped us to create our business plan, and Robert Mondavi hosted the first fundraiser at his private vineyard in Napa Valley. We raised $30,000 that particular evening, and the U.S. Department of State, Office of Political Military Affairs, Weapons Removal and Abatement graciously matched those funds. So on the first month of the new millennium, I could not think of a better place to take my footsteps than to the minefields of Croatia shortly after the Balkan War. 1.2 million landmines were planted during this time. And the beautiful vineyards that Mijenko Grgic, who won the Paris tasting in Napa Valley. 1976, there were 17 wineries in Napa Valley, and through the blind tasting, which this Croatian-born vintner snuck a little bottle of California wine and turned the wine world upside down, was actually born in Croatia. A few months later, he joined me to his homeland in May 2000. And together we raised over $250,000 to begin, again, our effort to remove these seeds of hatred, replacing the scourge of landmines with bountiful vineyards and orchards worldwide. My daughter Kylie is featured proudly near the California sunshine. We always love bringing our American culture to war-torn lands. In the situation of California and sunshine, we brought a piñata, and the dear children of Croatia were so appreciative to be able to play on former war-torn lands. You know, a child cannot chase a butterfly across a field or kick a soccer ball out of bounds without the fear of losing life or limb to a landmine. And when my daughter Kylie joined me and saw children tethered to poles, I asked the parents, I said, why so cruelly is this maypole created? And they said to me, Mrs. Kuhn, the field around you is heavily mined. If we don't tether our children to poles, they will lose life or limb to the remnants of war. And that was a very defining moment for me and my daughter. Kylie went forth and started the Roots of Peace penny campaign when she went to high school and raised an astonishingly 50 million American pennies for peace. Schools were built in Afghanistan, in Mirbo-Chukot and Bamsarai, and they remain there today. And again, shortly after the September 11th attacks on the United States of America, we learned about another region of the world where grapes were prolific. And due respect to the Muslim culture, the grapes are never fermented due to the respect of the Muslim culture, but the fresh grapes and raisins are indigenous to Afghanistan. It's a country where over 70 varietals of grapes once flourished. And Roots of Peace set our sight on Afghanistan at this point in history. We went up to the University of California, Davis, and met with the chancellor. We presented our Mines to Vines idea and the concept of expanding it beyond Croatia and into the vineyards of Afghanistan. The response from the community back to me was, well, haven't you seen Afghanistan on the news? It's all Tora Bora and caves. Nothing will grow. Go back home to your home in Marin County. And knowledge is power. And from an educational standpoint, Afghanistan is a country where over 80% of the population is dependent upon agriculture. Afghanistan was once dubbed the Garden of Central Asia. Before the Civil War, the Taliban wickedly not only planted landmines, but they burned the vineyards to destroy the spirit of the people in the areas north of Kabul and the Shamali plains. So we were determined more than ever to begin our journey in Afghanistan. In 2003, with generous funding by another California vintner, Diane Disney Miller, Roots of Peace received the largest check I had ever seen in my life. And when Mrs. Miller presented it to me, she told me, she said, "You remind me of Dad with that can-do spirit." And I looked down at the check and I said, "Mrs. Miller," I said, "who was your father?" And she said, "I'm Diane Disney Miller. My father was Walt Disney." And through those very generous Disney dollars, the fields north of Kabul were demined through our partnership with the United Nations Mine Action Group, led by Martin Barber and Mrs. Gillian Sorensen, Assistant Secretary General of the UN. And the Halo Trust did the actual demining, and then Roots of Peace then went to our new partners. We went to Washington, D.C., and we discussed the importance of introducing the trellis vines and engaging women with, again, respect to their culture. Roots of Peace is non-political, we're interfaith, and we respect the cultures in which we work. And as you can see the photo in the Shamali Plains, the women have burqas on. I'm sitting next to them, but again, with respect to the values, we find that we're welcomed into these remote communities. And through our partnership with USAID, which began in 2004, our RAMP program introduced the trellis vine. Now, what that means to those who are not familiar with the grape industry is that the grapes, when we arrived in Afghanistan, grew on mounds. And Roots of Peace introduced the trellis grinds. Those are the wooden stakes we often see in California that literally lift the grapes off the ground. You prune the vine, you double the yield. And in Afghanistan, when we arrived, we had a demonstration plot. We met with the elders, the gentlemen with the beards, and the mullahs, and asked for just give us a chance through the winter to see how these beautiful, luscious grapes can grow. Well, as you can see in a photo, I was allowed to take. Women normally do not allow photos of themselves, but again, it's all about trust in these remote areas of the world. And I can say these are the grapes that were proudly planted 10 years later after Diane Disney Miller's generous funding to demine these vineyard areas in the Shamali. Lush vineyards, grapes are growing. And again, with the exports that we've created and the trust with the Afghan farmers and traders, Roots of Peace has partnered not only with USAID, but DOD, European Union, Asian Development Bank, and the World Bank. And we are reclaiming the beautiful, restoring the garden of Central Asia, again, with the support of the Afghan government and the Ministry of Agriculture, dear friend of mine, Minister Durrani. And again, it's all about trust. Roots of Peace was, life is about sunshine and shadow, as I said, with my great grandfather and, missing the boat and wondering what you're going to do. Well, I had a similar experience, and in May 28th, 2014, Roots of Peace was attacked by the Taliban. And listening to it in the living room of my home in a 4.5-hour gun battle in the same room which I had been with my husband only a few weeks before, it was a defining moment. 5 Taliban were intentionally attacking a kindergarten center, and it just gives me riffles to even speak about it again. And when they detonated their bomb, they missed their intended target and they went straight into the Roots of Peace compound. Our proud Afghan guards fought off for 4.5 hours to protect an American NGO. Our 5 expats were hiding in corners under clothes, and we heard finally this final Ali Akbar, and the last young Taliban young man detonated himself. And there's no winners, there's no certainly victories in any of this, but it was a defining moment for me when I thought, this has just gotten too hard for a California mother and CEO. Well, at that time, my first grandson was born, and looking into his eyes, the Kennedy quote that always inspired to me, to whom much has been given, much is required. And we stepped up, and in partnership with USAID and our CHAMP program, the acronym for Commercial, Horticultural, Agricultural Marketing Program, Roots of Peace CHAMP, with our other partners, helped lead the way in taking agricultural exports from 250 million, which had averaged about for a decade, 250 million ag exports in 2014 to $1.4 billion at the end of 2019. Now that's a return on the investment. As we mourned yesterday, the tremendous loss of over 2,400 Americans who lost their life in Afghanistan following the September 11th attacks. Their great sacrifice has truly paved the way for us to train these farmers to grow high-value crops and provide exports to new markets. It's critically important that we stay this course for these young men, as you can see smiling in the background. I know this family very well, so it brings joy to my heart. The average annual income for an Afghan family is $800 growing wheat, low-value crop, $1,200 growing poppies, and over $4,000 with fresh grapes and other high-value crops. Along with my incredible team that we are working with today, we have received additional funding based on our business model, the Economics and Peace, and Reed Lohr is now working with me after the longest 10-year running program with USAID, our CHAMP program. We're now calling it AMP, and we're on to the next decade. And even though we're challenged with the perils of COVID-19, which is another phantom enemy along with landmines, we are determined with the Afghan farmers and families to dig deeper for peace like never before, to literally plant the roots of peace and provide access to new markets from Afghanistan through the air corridor route that Roots of Peace built with funding from USAID at Hamid Karzai Airport. You know, the cold storage facilities have allowed an entire transition of the economics of peace, as you see from President Ghani, who just officially extended his presidency this past month. And, you know, we are on target with Roots of Peace to provide the exports and the food security that is now going to be needed in this post-COVID world that we're living in. We're preparing in Kandahar and Helmand under the guidance of John Haydu, who is our incredible UNDP, INL, working with Roots of Peace as our country director, and he's helping navigate these exports from our Afghan traders in such remote provinces such as Nangarhar and Baglis and Farah and places that, you know, the majority of Americans are just not aware of the importance. So thank you to our team and our public-private partnership. Moving along around the world, this is my husband, Gary. He was for 10 years IBM and went with a little startup called Adobe Systems, and he did something called Acrobat. Now that was in the early days of the 1990s. They had two places to connect and a long way to fall. And I remember meeting with their wonderful founders, John Warnock and Chuck Geschke, and they thought, what do we call the product? Well, it's called Acrobat today. And my husband had played a great part in that, in the business of peace. And we are now working together. He came home one day and said, I've done well, now I want to do good, and really helped me so much to take Roots of Peace out of a shoebox and into the greater world. In Angola, the elephants suffer from the perils of landmines, and I'm very grateful to Dr. Jane Goodall, who also wrote a quote in my book, Breaking Ground, about the importance of respecting the fact that elephants have lived side by side with human beings for generations. And because of the landmines, they sense with their tender paws the thunder in the ground. And so instead of continuing along the Chobe River and the natural food, you know, that they would seek along the shores of the river, they remain clustered and infringe upon the food sources of the local villagers. So as a result, you know, where man and beast has lived cohesively together, the villagers are now shooting the elephants. So the whole balance of nature is set off balance. So Roots of Peace, Gary and I are standing in the same fields where Princess Diana had once stood to raise global landmine awareness. And Angola is a country, again, 80% dependent upon agribusiness. And as the mines are taken out, the agriculture may be restored and the business model of Roots of Peace can be expanded so that one day, inshallah, Angola could feed all sub-Sahara Africa and starvation would not be a problem. The other area that we've moved on to is Israel and Palestine, and I was inspired by a young boy named Daniel Yuval. Daniel was only age 10 when his family was playing in a rare snowball fight in the Golan area. They drove from their home in Ramat HaSharon several hours just to see the beautiful snowflakes. And as Daniel went running for a shiny object that he saw, he lost consciousness and a landmine burst. His mother, Tali, told me the story of seeing her husband carry the limp body of her child, missing a limb amidst the beautiful, pristine white snow. So I was called to his bedside by Jerry White, who's also a landmine survivor, and together Daniel, Jerry, and myself helped bring forth the first humanitarian mine action bill, which unanimously passed at the Knesset just a little over a year after his tragic accident. Again, going back to the generous California vintners, Shirley Dean and her husband Paul, owners of Spiriterra Vineyards, they gave us over 6 figures in funding from the private sector to allow us to remove landmines in the fields of Bethlehem, only 4 miles from where Jesus Christ was born in the manger. It's a Muslim village, Husan, and governed by Israel. So it's 3 faiths and 1 village. And again, no longer will the tragedy of those 8 children grow to more landmine victims, for that land is now safe for children to walk. Her Majesty Queen Noor has written the foreword to my book, Breaking Ground, and I'm very, very grateful for the interfaith respect for landmines know no borders. Vietnam, again, a country of my great passion. During the 1970s, as I mentioned, I was a student at UC Berkeley during the peace movement, and the Vietnam War was raging. And on April 30th, 1975, I think as young people, we were so happy the Vietnam War had finally ended. It certainly left an imprint of the DNA on our generation. Well, 45 years later, this past, again, April 30th, 2020, we celebrated the 45th anniversary of the end of the war. And yet in Quang Tri province, the former DMZ, where those on the line may remember the battle cries of Khe Sanh, Dong Ha, Cam Lo, Hamburger Hill, 80% of this land still remains riddled with the remnants of war. At the beginning of the year, I took intentional, intrepid footsteps with my husband to begin the new decade, 2020, with a clear vision in Vietnam. We brought an incredible delegation with us and led by Ambassador Kenneth Quinn. Now, Ambassador Kenneth Quinn is like going through the Vietnam War with a walking history book. The respect that I've always had for this gentleman from afar, as not only working at the White House, but he had in his early, in the 1960s, bravely served in the Vietnam War. And he came back with me, again, January 2020, with a clear vision of detonating landmines. Together, we put our thumb on the device and pressed together, and the bittersweet boom of a landmine went off. One of many. Ambassador Quinn, of course, was also the ambassador, the U.S. ambassador to Cambodia, and led the campaign in the late 1990s for the eradication of landmines. And he was able to see firsthand the beautiful black pepper that is being harvested on the former battlefields. Morton Goffelt, the owner of Morton & Bassett Spice Company, also fought in the Vietnam War. He was a pilot taking out those who were injured. And this was his way of giving back. So he has put the Roots of Peace logo on the back of every single bottle of black pepper sold on supermarket stores in the United States to raise the visibility of the importance of turning mines to vines. Ambassador Quinn had great plans along with our delegation to join me in this year being the 25th anniversary of normalization of friendship between the United States and Vietnam. Again, like my great-grandfather had plans to get on that boat, we too had great plans to raise the necessary $20 million to eradicate all explosive remnants of war in the DMZ by the end of 2020. The Napa Valley Vintners generously decided to join us for the largest veterans home in the United States of America is in Yountville, right in the heart of the Napa Valley. On the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, April 22nd, 2020, the clear vision of the Vintners was to help us raise that $20 million by 2020. Well, COVID-19, another phantom enemy, appeared on the global stage, and we are all now shelter at home. And it just gives me great pride to be here today in the same living room where the vision of the Roots of Peace was launched, a vision of replacing the scourge of landmines with bountiful vineyards and orchards worldwide. And kind of have chills down my arm, but I think my great-great-grandpappy would be awfully proud of those Scottish roots from 1701. The American dream is alive and well. We will be challenged. We will continue to be challenged, but we are a resilient nation. We are a resilient world. Let's work together. Let's eradicate all the landmines from the face of the earth. And together, may we plant the roots of peace. Tashakor, Kaman, thank you all so much.
Thank you, Heidi. Ellie here, your moderator. Thank you for the presentation. That was wonderful. I'm just going to start with some questions that we had in the chat box. So anybody else who wants to add some in there while we're answering these, feel free, and I will filter through those. So the first one is coming from Rob Rowan, and he's asking if the demining is 100% accurate or if they miss mines. Heidi, I don't know if you would like to speak to that. I can also, from my experience with the Popo, speak to that if you would like. But
Ellie, I think you're the expert in this field. I defer to you because you're on the front line demining with the hero rats. So maybe you could say a few words about what you do as such a courageous woman and answer Mr. Rowan's question.
Certainly, yeah. Well, first of all, Tracy mentioned earlier I work for Popo. I don't know if anybody can see my t-shirt here, but yeah, so Popo is an organization. We're headquartered here in Tanzania, in Morogoro, Tanzania, where I am now. And for the past 22 years, I believe, they've been training these African giant pouch rats to find landmines. We also do tuberculosis, which is more recent addition. And then where I work is actually in the research department. So improving training and finding also some new things that the rats can do. But to speak a little bit to the demining side, so Apopo is actually doing demining. So Heidi mentioned before that for her organization, demining is done by other people, and then she comes in after and takes this land, which has been sort of left alone for decades because people were too afraid and weren't able to use it. So Apopo is doing the physical demining with the help, of course, of our rats. And from our side, our rats have never missed a mine, which is wonderful, of course. So there are, of course, lots of other methods for demining, but as far as the rats go, they have never missed a mine. And even in training, in order to pass a test, they are not allowed to miss anything. They can falsely indicate one time, but they cannot have any misses, with our reasoning being, well, we'd rather them say there's something here and there be nothing than they miss something. So in training, they're not allowed to miss any mines. And so far in operations, we have not had any rats miss a mine. So Heidi, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, just to say Opopo is just an incredible organization, these hero rats, and your founder, Bart Whittigans, and myself met in 2006. Again, Roots of Peace was built by the support of many, and Jeff Skoll, the co-founder of eBay, has started some incredible organization called the Skoll World Forum, and presented to both Bart and myself in 2006 the Skoll Award for Social Entrepreneurship. I must say he gave us generously $1 million, and Roots of Peace I'm proud as CEO to have grown that to over 100 million under contract in Afghanistan. One of the questions coming in is, who runs our offices now in Afghanistan? Well, they're overseen by our expats, who many are on the line here and funded by USAID. But Roots of Peace makes payroll to 250 Afghans in Afghanistan, and we're very, very proud of our 17-year relationship. Many of our Afghan employees have worked with us for well over a decade. And I believe the way to navigate the world is through trust. It's trust in our programs and trust in working even with the women. And again, with respect to the cultures, bringing in those little baby chicks inside of their compounds that are walled. They grow the baby chicks, the husbands bring them to market, the family has more income. And much like microcredit lending, there's hope. There's hope through agriculture. And as Ambassador Kenneth Quinn has always taught me, peace through agriculture. It's the most important thing we could be talking about today. So thank you to those hero rats, and I hope to partner with you on many minefields until we accomplish our goal to eradicate all landmines by 2025 as envisioned by Prince Harry.
Absolutely, that's definitely the goal. Heidi, I actually have a question, if you don't mind, just sort of my personal interest. Because from our work, I know that often these minefields are just sitting for decades. They're overgrown. Nobody's touched them. They're too afraid. So I just wanted to know, after they've been demined and you come in, how do you know, like, who gets the land? Does it have an owner from the beginning that's just been letting it sit? Does the community somehow come together and decide? How does that work?
Yes. Well, we begin when we work in any country, we work with the government, and the government is very different, of course, in the case of Afghanistan, a Muslim country, Vietnam, a communist country, where the land has gone fallow and it's been held hostage, Ellie, by landmines for so long. And you do half the problem, the important problem. Roots of Peace never aspires to get in the demining business. We leave it for you and the experts. But after the land mines are removed, there has never been a business model is what comes after. And what has happened, let's say, for instance, in the case of Afghanistan, generations of war from the 1970s, grandfather taught son, to grow. Grandfather to father to son, that generational wisdom was broken. And, when we went first into Afghanistan, they gave us a demonstration plot before even allowing us to work on the land where people had farmed for hundreds of years and certainly title to that land, but the land being held hostage. We introduced the wooden trellis posts and came back the next year. The farmers cut them all down, and we said, guys, we told you, trust us, prune the vine, double the yield. They looked at me again. I learned a very big and American lesson very quickly again. Mrs. Kuhn, it was the coldest winter on record. Had we not burned those wooden posts, we couldn't have kept warm or fed our families. So, lesson learned. But we listen. Roots of Peace listens. We listen to the agronomy of the land. What is the best agricultural high-value crop? And then when we go in, we introduce the cement trellis posts. And now, again, our job is to put ourselves out of business. We want to train. We don't want any more landmines, number one. And we want to train the trainers. So one day, we're not a Band-Aid on a wound. You have sustainable peace through agriculture by the demining, the replanting, and then the rebuilding of communities. So I see this as a partnership. 60 million landmines silently poised in 60 countries. Can those on the line imagine what that feels like? We've had a spring of shelter at home with COVID-19. Can you imagine the empathy and understanding we could come out of with this dis-ease of not only COVID-19, but the empathy for those living shelter in place every day for fear of farming their land, or again, their child kicking a soccer ball out of bounds. We have the ability and humankind to emerge from the phantom enemy of COVID-19 and garner together to remove the hidden killers of landmines.
Absolutely, that's great. That kind of feeds nicely into another question I had, which is also related to Tracy's question about who is running the field offices now. So I was just wondering, what does Roots of Peace do as far as capacity building in local communities to ensure that once your organization is sort of hands off, that these local people are empowered and able to sustain everything independently?
Mm-hmm. Well, capacity building is part of our mission plan, and again, the case. Let's go back to 2004 in Afghanistan. Farmers, because of that broken value chain, would harvest at midday in the hot sun, drag their fruits to market on burlap sacks, and hope to get a meager profit. Again, with funding gratefully received from USAID, we introduced the cold storage refrigeration, the corrugated boxes, the branding of Afghan products, because oftentimes they would go through Pakistan, they would brand these lush grapes, Pakistani grapes, and again, get far more in terms of profit. So capacity building begins at the farm level, and it's farm to fork, and providing the access to these new markets. Again, from Afghanistan to India and UAE, the demand for these beautiful fresh fruits. In the 1940s, there was a legend in Afghanistan called the Kabuliwalas. And in India, every young person knows that folklore of these traders who would come down with these beautiful, lush, fresh fruits. And believe me, I've tasted, I'm not doing a commercial for Afghanistan, but the pomegranates that are grown in Kandahar are just, from a Californian, I can say they're some of the best in the world, but it's restoring that fruit basket of Central Asia, and the capacity building will be training the trainers so that they have access to new markets. Now, because of the legacy of war and terrorism, very serious terrorism, the buyers are reluctant to fly into Afghanistan to make purchases. But what we have done for the past decade with the USAID CHAMP program is bring the Afghan traders to Gulf Food, in the largest food exhibition in Dubai, and of course to India, and they meet with the wholesale buyers, the big supermarket chains such as Big Bazaar and Reliance, and they're able to make sure what we are doing with our incredible chief of parties, again, John Haydu and Reed Lohr, under their leadership in the United States now, because they're also shelter at home, are working via technology, as we're all communicating here today via Zoom, to coordinate this harvest of hope. And hats off to them. It's just, for me to oversee this as CEO, it's just astonishing. And I believe this linkage is able to stay in place amidst the great challenges of COVID-19, just based on trust. We know the people and the farmers in these remote villages. We're not going to give up on them. And again, dig deeper than ever for peace.
Yeah, absolutely. That's so important, especially in these times. Tracy asks also, what will countries do to get rid of the huge stockpiles of landmines? I think maybe I can quickly answer that just based on our experience. So when Apopo is doing demining operations, any landmine that is found is taken to a different location, safe location, and destroyed there. So that's what they do. Mm-hmm. And then Tracy also asked to Heidi, with the current increased tensions in Afghanistan and recent attacks on civilians, are you subject to attack from the Taliban, or have they changed their attitude towards your work now?
Well, that's a good question. Again, I lead by faith, not fear. And 23 years ago, I mean, probably the most dangerous job I could have walked myself and my family into, and that is detailed in my book, Breaking Ground. But it's just a defining moment. I mean, I could have gone home and hid under my covers and gone back into the tennis courts with my girlfriends. But the majority of Afghan farmers and families are good, decent people. And unfortunately, the headlines of the news are always on the negativity. So So, you know, the families that I think of when I close my eyes every night before going to sleep are those, you know, we are servicing on the ground, and those whom I may never meet. But stability comes from having the dignity to walk your land without the fear of landmines, and secondarily, the ability to feed your family. Once they double and triple their income, they're able to educate their children. And one of my proudest employees came to work for me when he was 18 years old and recently graduated from the London School of Economics, and went to work for UNDP, and now proudly working with me to accelerate this harvest of hope. So, you know, I have to be an optimist to be in this business. And yes, are there landmines in front of us every day we walk out the door? But I choose to live my life, you know, with belief in the farmers and the families, and the dignity to plant the roots of peace on earth.
Mm.
But I'm not naive. You know, guarded optimism, as my great grandmother would always teach me, guarded optimism, and, you know, surrounding yourself by the best possible people. And again, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, Ellie, to talk to you in Tanzania. And I think one of the questions was, you know, why don't we just go ahead and demine the face of the earth? And I think maybe you could help answer, Ellie. It's about money. You know, it's really bottom line. It's about money. And, you know, opportunities to speak about something we don't have to think of in the United States, something as cruel and ugly as landmines, is it's a luxury in a place called Tanzania. So maybe you have some.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
I mean, what could you do with money? What could you do in Popo with money to demine the land and make it safe for cultivation?
I mean, you're absolutely right. It's much easier said than done. You know, it seems like a simple thing. I'll just dig them up, you know, get rid of them. But yeah, it's definitely easier said than done. And a lot of it is money. It's also, it's time. And part of it is also what you've said about, you know, building trust. It's because we also, you know, we go into these communities and we don't necessarily know where even the minefield would be. You know, you have to get in these communities and have to, you know, talk to people, find out where should we even look, because if you put your resources into the wrong location, everything is wasted, you know, because it does take a lot of time and a lot of money to get these projects done, and you have to be sure that you're investing in the right area.
Mm-hmm. And Ellie, I that question back to you. You know, are you afraid to do your job? You're a beautiful and highly intelligent young woman. You know, what do your friends, what do your family tell you what you should be doing with your education? Why do you do it? I'm tossing it back to you.
My job maybe sounds a bit more exciting than it is. I mean, I don't actually work on the minefield, so I'm not going to active minefields. I'm on the research team, so what we're doing is I'm looking into ways we can improve the training of the rats, and also totally new applications for the rats. But yeah, I don't often go. I never go to an active minefield. We don't have any here. The minefield we have here in Tanzania is full of deactivated landmines. It's for training the rats only. And we breed and train all of the rats here, and then we export them elsewhere, where we usually send some of our staff with them to train local staff at wherever they're going. Right now, we're sending rats to Cambodia for demining. So we send some of our staff who are highly trained and have been working with these rats for upwards of 20 years, most of them. So we send them there, they train local people, and we also cooperate with like some other organizations. So that's how we get it done. Tracy also asked if I could briefly describe the training process and also how long they live. Quickly, they live an average of 9 years, which is quite long for a rodent, similar to a dog, a large dog. And the training process, also not, I don't know, maybe it's very complicated, but simple if you understand behavior, right? So they're clicker trained like you would a dog when you want to teach it how to sit and shake and whatever. So we first clicker train them, and then we start with these little tea eggs, which you would use to infuse a cup of tea. We fill them with TNT, and we train the rats using the clicker. When they get close to that, they get a reward. And then over time, the task gets more difficult. You know, you have some other odors around, but they have to learn only this TNT odor is what gets me the reward. And then eventually they will go out into the minefield, which is quite a big jump from our office, where they're working in basically like a giant sandbox where we put things in the ground. Then they transition to the minefield, which is full of mines that have been buried there for decades. So that's quite different, but I mean, their noses are incredible. So yeah, that's briefly how we do it. Another question for me, what made me decide to go to Tanzania and how did I get started? As my bio said, I was working with rats in college. I've always been a rat lover. I think everyone at Apopo here is kind of, well, not the local staff, maybe that's another hurdle to get over, because here the rats are seen as pests and gross, kind of like everywhere else in the world. But yeah, for me, I was a rat lover always, so it was kind of easy for me to make that transition. I wanted to keep working with animals, but I wanted to do it in a way that was helpful and a positive experience, not like dissecting them or something. Also, another question, how many rats do I work with at any one time? You mentioned sending off to various parts of the world. How many are there? Right now at our office, we have about 100 rats that are in training and also retired. We have like a rat Malibu sort of at our office for the old rats. And for me personally, I usually work with groups of about 12 or so. Just that's what we can handle at a given time. But again, I'm on the research side, and the mine detection training team is working independently of me. Sometimes we do collaborate on projects. But yeah, they're training generally about 40 rats at a given time in various stages of training, so it all works out somehow. I know there's no new questions, but I remember Rob had asked Heidi if you could share a story that really shows the impact of the change you do. I don't know if you have one in mind.
Oh, I have so many. Goodness gracious. Wow. Pick a country. Well, I told you about the young man who now works with me. He was a teenager and got an education because we empowered his family. And another beautiful story is in Quang Tri, Vietnam. A young man, was born, long after the Vietnam War ended, and he was digging in his garden, and a landmine exploded, and he lost both his forearms. His name was Tu, and it was tragic, and because of that stereotype of being unlucky in those countries, they call it unlucky, and being a landmine survivor, he wasn't allowed to marry, really. Nobody would have him. Well, a girl with a cleft palate came, and they fell in love, and they had a beautiful child. And Roots of Peace helped him to demine the land so that their child would not have to suffer the landmines. And we also went one step further to give her cleft palate surgery. So when I went there and met him, his arms, he picked the fruit with his elbows, with his forearms, presented me the fruit, and thanked us because his child would not have to suffer what he suffered. And he said, "Now I have the most beautiful wife in the village with the biggest smile." And, all thanks to Roots of Peace. So we're in the business of smiles. That was a heartwarming one. One of the saddest ones, and again, the reality, I just don't want to think we live in La La Land out here with anything but we were able, again, Marin County is the other side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and it's, has grown from being a ranching, county to an affluent community. And we hosted a Roots of Peace fundraiser, a black tie event. We were very fortunate to raise a couple $100,000. And at the hour we were having our fundraiser, there was a young boy, Juan Van Tron, at that same hour, picking up what he thought was a rock to fix his bicycle in Quang Tri. And as he beat the rock against his bike, it was actually a cluster munition. It blew off his face and his right arm. And the next month I was going to Vietnam. So I went into that very dingy and dirty hospital in Quang Tri and met with Hoang and promised him, as his mother was holding her hand over my shoulder, which it was so hard, I remember, to fight back the tears and then to understand the spirit of forgiveness of Vietnamese people. It taught me so much about their spirit of forgiveness, because I figured that bomb that blew off his face and part of his hand came from an American mine that was left behind. But I promised little boy an arm. It took me several months. I went back, and it was just top on my list to get the money for a proper prosthesis to be fitted, so he could restore his dreams. Our staff took us to the remote village in Vinh Linh, province of Quang Tri, and the hour we arrived, the mother was there with a white band and dressed in white. And I thought, well, how odd. There's lots of people in this little village greeting us. And as we got closer and closer, unbeknownst also to my team, the Vietnamese have a tradition that the 49th day of somebody's passing, their soul goes to heaven. And I arrived at the hour that little boy had died. So it was just a moment to me that I thought, you know, there's no way I can go back to Marin County, to California, to the United States, and not speak loudly about the importance of raising the funds to eradicate the mines in Quang Tri. And Ellie, if there is a way that we could even partner for even a portion of that land with a popo, it would be, you know, my great honor to introduce you to Pat Shake. I think she's met with your country director, Chris, in Washington, D.C. And maybe just not talking heads on the Zoom, we'll be able maybe a year from now to go back to the World Affairs Council upstate international and tell them that we were true to our roots and maybe alleviate the suffering for just one more child of stepping on a landmine.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, those stories
we'll put them
heartwarming and sad, but just, I mean, exactly the sort of thing that we have to accept as reality.
Yeah, yeah. But we have the power through funding to alleviate the suffering, and I think it is through forums like this. I really salute Kim Fowler and Tracy Fries for inviting both of us, because most conversations are consumed with COVID-19. Certainly as they should be. But this again is another phantom enemy, and that's the phantom enemy of landmines. So we can't turn a blind eye to the rest of the world as they suffer.
Absolutely.
So it's and it's wonderful to work with a young woman. I'm just so proud of you, Ellie, and give me a hero rat and we'll put him to good use somewhere on this planet. There's an Aesop's fable in that or something with the elephants. We can do something.
There are a few more questions about the rats, so I'll take those off first. So Karen is asking, do the rats respond to a variety of verbal cues, or do they just know to sniff out mines? So the rats will do anything you train them to do, basically. They're incredibly smart. Their noses are amazing. So, I mean, even in my work in research, like, we find the rats can even be so sensitive to, if you prepare a sample in a different order than you did it yesterday, or if somebody else does it, I mean, they will pick up on it. So that's just one small example of how powerful their noses are. Yeah, they can respond to any verbal cue. It's just a matter of how you train them. So the clicker is just what we do in tuberculosis detection. They're working in a cage, a big long cage with holes in the floor. And there we also use a clicker, but we have some versions that are more automated. The click always signals reward, but they also have like a sensor that emits an audible beep when the rats are putting their nose in the hole, for them to sort of have that as a guide. They will respond to your voice. They respond to each other. They make these lovely squeaking sounds, especially my office is right behind my office window is one of the kennels, and you can always tell when it's feeding time because there is like a frenzy of squeaks going on. Even when their neighbor gets a banana and they get something that they don't like so much, maybe there is some complaining happening. So yeah, you can definitely, it's just a matter of what you train them to do. Like you can pretty much train them to do anything. Judy's asking if rat use is one of the most effective methods in finding mines, or are there other methods and how do they compare? So the rats are very efficient. They can cover a lot of ground in a little bit of time. They don't pick up on scrap metal as a metal detector would. So another way would just be to have a person physically walking through with a metal detector, but they're going to run into a lot of like, oh, here's a soda tap and here's this or whatever. And so the rats are very efficient in that way because they ignore all of that. They're just looking for the explosive itself. They're very easy to train, pretty inexpensive to house. They live a long time, so it's a good investment, but for not a lot of money. Another common method is the dogs, and we hate to compare ourselves to dogs because the dogs are also incredible, but it's just a different thing. And maybe another advantage of the rats versus a dog is just the rat is smaller. So some dogs, especially the ones they use for scent detection, are big enough to detonate a landmine. A rat is never going to do that, so that's just one advantage. But as far as rats versus dogs go, we don't really like to make that comparison, and we like the dogs and we respect their work, and it's just as good as a rat. It's just a different way of doing things. But yeah, rats are smaller, so there's no chance they're going to detonate any landmine. They will never get hurt on the job. And yeah, that's that. Heidi, this question is for you. How can everyone help you?
www.rootsopeace.org. That's the simple answer, but thank you for asking that because, you know, I'm a pragmatic thinker, but not just, you know, peace out in the 70s, but you got to dig deeper for peace. So just a blue sky I'll put out there to the team based on this conversation. But you're training the rats. Many of them are destined for Cambodia. We have former Ambassador Kenneth Quinn, who I believe joined us on this call, former president of the World Food Prize. And maybe with some of the good folks we know under the leadership of Pat Shake, who works with us in Washington, D.C., we could have a discussion to identify an area of land that needs demining in Cambodia. Roots of Peace would determine the best high-value crop, do an analysis of the land and access to exports to the new markets, and perhaps we can put something together. We can put a financial number around how much it would cost to demine and replant. And I want to give a shout out to Pat Shake on the line. She used to her former position prior to becoming senior vice president for Roots of Peace was the deputy administrator for USDA. And she was, in essence, the highest woman in the U.S. government. She believed in Roots of Peace and gave us over $3 million for a wheat flour monetization program, meaning the wheat grown from the United States was then transported across the ocean through the Khyber Pass, and somehow my husband Gary and I managed to receive it in the back of a truck in the days of when we had to carry the cash in briefcases and hope not to be shot before banking got around there in Afghanistan. But Pat saw the success of our program. She came on board as our member of our board of directors, and when we had the funding available, I'm very proud to say hired her as senior vice president and one of the most competent women I know in U.S. agriculture today. So, you know, I had the vision, but I always love that quote by Sir Isaac Newton: if I've seen further than others, it's only because I've stood on the shoulders of giants. And Pat and Ambassador Quinn are two of those giants who have certainly helped me see further than I could have from my own backyard.
Awesome. Well, I'm not seeing any more questions rolling in. So suggest if anybody has any last questions to type them in quickly. And I just want to thank Tracy and Kim for putting this together and for inviting me, and Heidi, of course. It's wonderful to connect because there aren't so many of us out there doing this type of work, but of course it's very important work. So nice to connect with some others and other organizations that are contributing. With that, I don't see any other questions. So I'd just like to thank everybody for joining and remind you guys that the next event will be on Thursday, May 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. I'm assuming that will be Eastern Standard Time. It will be with Chef Luca, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Chef Luca Morbillo from Florence, Italy. He's going to prepare regional Tuscan and Neapolitan recipes. It's going to be moderated by, again, hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, David Porras, executive chef and co-owner of a newly opened restaurant in Greenville. So nice to see those South Carolina ties. Oak Hill Cafe and Farm. And if you would like any other information, you can visit the Upstate International website. I would encourage everyone to also check out the Roots of Peace website, local website, for any other questions or something that you have. And if you would like to donate to either of us or adopt a rat, feel free. Symbolically adopt.
How much is it to adopt a rat? How much is it to adopt a rat, Ellie?
That I actually don't know. I think the price can vary on depending like what you want to support. Also, if you want to adopt a mine detection rat or a TB rat, you can also make like a one-time donation. There are some cute like gifts that our marketing team made, like donating a basket of bananas and something like that. But I think for some reason I want to say it's like $6 a month, but don't know if that's true.
Right,
and
well,
it might be different.
I'll adopt a rat, one for each of my children, if it's $6 a month. So tell
yeah,
Bart.
don't quote me on that, but yeah, for sure. Check out the Roots of Peace website and the Apopo website. So thank you everyone for joining. I think that's all.